Former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio suing the New York Times for more than $147 million for alleged libel. The man himself will join us in just a moment. Plus, special counsel Robert Mueller reportedly getting ready to release key findings from his investigation after the midterms. Should the president and his team be worried about anything there? And Newsmax sent one of regular guests, former NYPD Detective Bo Dietl, on the streets of New York City. We're going to talk about that story and so much more right here on the third hour of America Talks Live. Welcome to the third hour of this edition of America Talks Live. We're happy to have you with us. I have my friend Dick Farrell in with us today, joining me as co-host. And we, of course, as always, are taking your phone calls. Calling right now, 1-877-NEWSMAX. That's 1-877-639-7629.
Let's take a look at what President Trump is up to today. He'll be heading to Missoula, Montana, right? That's where he's going, for the western part of the state?
Western part of the state. Is going to be there to campaign for Republican candidate Matt Rosendale, plus incumbent Congressman Greg Gianforte.
And Rosendale is looking to unseat Senator John Tester, while Gianforte, that's how you say it, is challenging Democrat Kathleen Williams for Montana's only House seat. That means the House seat is as important as any of the Senate seats. It's just as big.
Yes, and former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio is filing a libel lawsuit against the New York Times, and he's seeking more than $147 million in damage for an opinion piece a Times writer wrote about him. The former sheriff claims it had several false and defamatory factual assertions. The writer, Michelle Cottle, wrote the piece back in August after Arpaio lost in the GOP Senate primary in Arizona, and the complaint filed in court said the article was intended to hurt his reputation. The Times says it will have a vigorous defense for it, and that's exactly where we want to welcome in our first guest, the man himself, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and his lawyer, good friend of the show here, Larry Klayman. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, let's say we talk about the Migrant Caravan now that's headed toward our border.
Well, let's go to that, but let's
lawsuit first.
Sheriff, let me ask you. I think a lot of conservatives like myself, I had fictitious stories written like crazy about me when my new book came out. They questioned my credentials. They said they weren't real. They straight up lied about me, even when I met, hoping that you win just for the sheer principle of it, Sheriff. But what are the real chances, as far as you know, of winning these sorts of suits?
Gina, let me answer that first as his lawyer, because what you have here is malice, okay? It was vicious. It was malicious. They accused the sheriff, my good friend and client, of many, many heinous crimes, and you can't do that. That's called defamation per se, and when that happens, damages are presumed, okay? So we don't even have to show that there are damages, but the large figure that we're asking for is actually small, $147 million plus, is based on punitive damages to prevent the New York Times from ever doing this kind of thing again, and to send a message to the entire leftist fake news media that they will be held accountable for trashing, destroying people's lives, and every other evil act that they do.
Right, but Sheriff, I want to get from you, what's the impact on your life from this? I mean, some of it is very obvious from a professional standpoint, but I'm speaking more to the personal part of it, because I know it's especially hard for families. I know my family was very upset. The people around me on my staff, very upset, wanting to set the record straight. What's been the impact on you personally?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Larry Klayman with the courage to go forward and take on this big newspaper. So, Larry, I want to thank you again. You had the guts to do this. And also, after 55 years in law enforcement, 24 years as the sheriff who's been elected 6 times, I have a reputation to be concerned of, my family also. And for this newspaper to hit me like they did, and of course, I know the danger right now because all the other media will repeat all these false allegations in every article they write.
That's what
But
they
I'm
do.
willing to take on this fight, not just for me, but for the president and others that have been in the same boat that I'm in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Larry, what are your thoughts in terms of the realistic ability to win this case? Because I have heard about other friends of mine that newspapers have written horrible things about it. And the problem is whenever they do settle, a lot of times the settlements are actually concealed. That's part of the actual agreement at the end. But what are the chances of winning this for him? And what are the chances? I mean, we know that I believe it was the Inquirer that was successfully sued. I personally happen to know of others that my friends have sued. I may or may not have one of those going on myself at this moment. But my question for you is, can we win it? And then what is the realistic possibility, or what's it going to take for them to stop writing fake news? I mean, it's become a term of the day, right? Fake news.
The newspaper is going to hide behind the First Amendment. They're going to say they have a right to lie or a right to insult Sheriff Arpaio. They're going to tell you that they are protected because he's a public servant or was a public figure. Am I right, Mr. Klayman?
Well, yeah, they'll try that. But here's the difference here. And I've done a lot of defamation cases. I've won cases for public figures. And the sheriff is a public figure. But you can't do something maliciously or recklessly and get away with it. And you can't accuse someone of committing a crime. Here, he's being accused of all kinds of crimes. And that's the worst type of defamation. That's why I say it's called defamation per se. There's also a thing called false light in the District of Columbia where we brought the case. Whereas if you hold someone out to extreme ridicule in the community, you can also be held liable. So I would say we have an excellent chance of winning. And the New York Times is basically going to have to eat crow here, as well as eat a lot of money, we hope. We want to bring the New York Times to its financial knees. As the president says, it's a failing newspaper. So I want to bring it to the point where it can no longer do these kinds of things. And perhaps, maybe we'll buy the New York Times and turn it around and make it an honest newspaper.
Wish you luck.
That would sure be nice. All right, let's move on to the Migrant Caravan. Dick, you wanted to talk about that.
We've been talking about the Migrant Caravan that's headed through Central America right now on its way here. It originated in Honduras. Now it's grown to about 4,000 people. The president's warning is going to close the border and actually use military force to enforce that border. The president tweeted, "I'm watching the Democrat Party because they want open borders and existing laws made weak. Assaulting our country by Guatemalans, Hondurans, and El Salvadorans, whose leaders are doing little to stop this large flow of people from entering Mexico on their way to the United States."
And he followed that up by tweeting, in addition to stopping all payments to these countries, which seem to have almost no control over their population, I must, in the strongest of terms, ask Mexico to stop this onslaught. And if unable to do so, I will call up the U.S. military and close our southern border. He ended then with this. The assault on our country at our southern border, including the criminal elements and drugs pouring in, is far more important to me as president than trade or the USMCA. So hopefully Mexico will stop this onslaught at their northern border. All Democrats' fault for weak laws. Sheriff Joe, you were known well for your very innovative solutions to law breaking, right? What do you think of the president saying he would shut down the border?
Well, G. Gordon Liddy and I in 1969 had Operation Intercept under Nixon. We ran that, and that border was sealed for 2 weeks, and that told the Mexicans that we were very, very serious, straighten that one out. But in my campaign, I said we should send the U.S. Army across the border and help the Mexican authorities. I did that when I was regional director many, many years ago. Why can't we do that? Also, I mentioned take away their foreign aid. If these countries do not stop this, take away their money. I think the president has just said that too. So there's ways to solve this problem, but you have to get tough and make sure that they know we are serious. So I'm behind the president 100% on those issues.
There's speculation, Sheriff Joe, that perhaps George Soros and others of his ilk are behind paying these migrants to come here, because apparently there was, our last guest, Chris Salcedo, said there were women and children, or women with children rather, paid money to join the Migrant Caravan. I happen to look at the Migrant Caravan, at least the tapes I've seen of it, Sheriff, and most of them looked like very able-bodied, military age, well-fed very well-fed men, young men. And so, you know, I think that probably this was planned to be a something for the midterms, right?
Exactly.
A political plot to make the president look bad right around the time of the midterms and call back to mind the separating of women and children and all that. But it doesn't look like this particular incident is working very well. And in fact, there was an edict handed down from Democrat leadership saying, don't talk about the migrants. Don't talk about illegal immigration. Sheriff Joe, you've been in politics a long time. What do you make of all of this?
Yes.
Well, let me say this. George Soros pumped in almost $3 million to get me defeated in a general election a couple of years ago.
No surprise.
Unfortunately, there are some politicians in bed with him, too. You do know that. So it's a big problem. I wouldn't be surprised if he's behind this, either directly or indirectly. So the president's tough. Got to get tough for these foreign countries. I cover those countries for 4 years. I know how they operate. So you have to put the fear into them, get the job done. And if they do get to Mexico through all these Central American countries, that's the last stop. Then you stop them across the border. Don't let them come across. You stop them across the border with any means, diplomatic, political, whatever force, to send a message out. And they'll listen.
Yeah. Well, Larry, last question. We've only got about 40 seconds, but I want to ask you, is there any legal recourse for the Americans who are putting money in on what is basically a political plot in an effort to break our laws in America and get these people to come here and cross the border?
There may be, Gina. You know, it was the sheriff and I who played an instrumental role in getting Obama's amnesty for 500 million people killed in the courts in Texas, in the Fifth Circuit, and at the Supreme Court. We brought the first case in D.C. We got an Obama appointee, but we then went on to Texas, and we won. So there are things that we can do here, and I hope people will join us, and I hope people will support Sheriff Arpaio's lawsuit against the New York Times, because it's for everybody, the president and everyone. They can go to freedomwatchusa.org, read that complaint, support us. We need the help, because if we can take the New York Times down, or at least put a chink into its side, it will have a chilling effect on going after conservatives like you and me and others, notwithstanding the heroic sheriff here. And we need to really do something. He's really the first one to push back in a major way against the New York Times. And it shows you how courageous this man is. It's why I admire him. It's why he's my friend and also my client.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Both of you. Sheriff Joe Arpaio, thank you so much for your time today. Best of luck to you in this lawsuit. I certainly think you have been targeted unfairly. That's my personal opinion. And we thank you for joining us. And Larry, we're asking you to stick around for just a little while longer if you can.
It'll be worth your while.
And we have either yes or no. We'll give the results of the poll at the end of the show. Stay with us.